Today's episode is brought to you by my top resource for women's health professionals, How to Interpret Virtually Any Chart Your Client Throws at You. Our new ebook breaks down complex chart interpretation into an easy step-by-step process. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/chart to snag your complimentary copy today. That's fertilityfriday.com/chart. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 500. Today I'm sharing a brand new episode in our FAMM Practitioner series. I'm sharing an interview with Brooke. She was a member of FAMM in the class of 2023. We delve into some important topics, including the impact of exercise on the menstrual cycle and some of Brooke's personal takeaways from being in the program this year. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's episode. And I'm so excited to be here today with Brooke. Brooke is a current member of the class of 2023 FAMM. And at the time that we're recording, we have been together for a complete program. So a complete 9-month stint. We actually had our last official class a week or two ago. So it's really fun to be able to be here with you, especially at this time, kind of coming full circle. So welcome to the show, Brooke.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It's such a privilege to be here. I'm really excited to come and share my story and get to talk with you today.
Yeah, well, I'm so thankful for you to be here, and I'm really excited to get into everything with you. And before we do, share a little bit about your background. Let us know what you do for a living. And then also my favorite question that I always like to ask is, how old were you when you had your first period? And then maybe take us through what led you to jump into the FAMM program.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to share kind of a little arc, a timeline of my story kind of from a personal lens, and then also professionally, and how it kind of led me to this amazing world of fertility awareness, because it's kind of a long and winding path that started from a young age. But thinking through when I was younger, I had kind of a small understanding of this nebulous thing called hormones, right? So as a young girl, I actually watched my mom go through very debilitating migraine headaches, and those lasted for a long time. There were days that she couldn't function, and I remember some days like we'd be woken up in the middle of the night, my siblings and I, we'd have to go to the ER with my mom to get a shot of medication to take her out of her pain, and it was really hard. And so I think, at that young age, I associated hormones with being pain and suffering. But I was also really curious about how our bodies work. So as I entered middle school years, my mom gave me this little book. I don't know if you guys know this. It's the American Girl book called The Care and Keeping of You. And that was my textbook. I read it over and over and over again. And I thought I was so prepared for when my period would come. So when it did, I was 13 years old, and my mom was so sweet. She got me a bouquet of flowers and a card that said, "Welcome to the wonderful world of womanhood." And that was so sweet of her. But sadly, my welcome to my period was not welcoming at all. I ended up having really painful, really heavy periods. I remember sitting there one day thinking, like, as I was cramping, oh my gosh, like, if I have to deal with this every single month, like, life as I know it is over. It's going to be totally different and not for the better. So my mom ended up taking me into the doctor, and I was advised to just kind of keep going, wait it out, take ibuprofen. And looking back, I'm really grateful that I wasn't put on the pill or anything like that, because eventually my periods did normalize and regulate, even though, I still dealt with some cramps throughout my teenage years, and still sometimes today cramps come up, but not like they did in those early days. But with all the period things, I actually kind of gave way to a new challenge, which was more like disordered eating patterns and an unhealthy relationship with food. So kind of a trigger warning to listeners, because I know this is like a sensitive topic. But like as I was hitting puberty, I started to notice that my body was changing shape and I was getting curves. And that was actually really pretty difficult because I felt alone in that process. I had 3 skinny brothers who grew tall as they matured, and I wanted to be tall and skinny too. So I did lots of long distance running. I actually ran my first half marathon when I was 15, and I had to get special permission from the race director to run it. And I just remember being very determined, probably pretty hard-headed, goal-oriented. And, I don't think that was all bad, but I know that I was pretty focused on running because it kept me slim. And I paired that with, just kind of some restrictive eating or just very, very clean eating so that I could manipulate my body size. So, that's kind of the relationship I had with my body at the time, kind of in those high school years. And then through high school, I was trying to figure out, next steps. What am I going to do in school? Where am I headed? And I'd always been, like I mentioned earlier, just super curious about how our bodies work. And that kind of paired with the desire to help people. So nursing was a very obvious choice for me. And I decided to pursue a degree in that, got accepted into nursing school. And, looking back, it was actually a very stressful season of my life. I was able to work with women in a birthing center and I got to attend births while I was in school, but that also kind of caused some dysregulated sleep patterns. I'd have memories of staying up during the wee hours of the morning at a birth and studying for tests in between births and then going in at 8 a.m. to take a test. So I don't really think I realized how stressful that season was until looking back on it. And that actually ultimately manifested itself in my body. I had developed this rash on my right hand that kind of extended into my fingertips and had a positive antibody testing, which, was indicative of some possible type of autoimmune disorder. And so kind of like that stress, not sleeping enough, not eating enough, likely over exercising as like stress relief and compensating. It's kind of this perfect constellation to cause some of those symptoms, even though I was just doing the best that I could to take care of myself at the time. So, there are some really good things to that season of life, but it was intense and that kind of shaped my early adult years. But then, what kind of led me into nursing and then women's health, I ended up graduating nursing school as an RN when I was 20 and I moved to be closer to my family, got this small job in a hospital working in our women's center. So in that place, we actually got to take care of a lot of different types of patients. We did labor and delivery and postpartum, special care nursery with really little babies, and then OBGYN surgical patients. And I was there for 5 years and I had lots of exposure to women's health during that time. And that's really where I became more aware of women's pain and suffering as like a general collective, right? Like all of these, I started dot connecting. I started listening to stories of my patients, even friends, family, people I came into contact with, and, listening to stories of infertility and painful periods, pregnancy challenges, postpartum, bleeding problems. And, that's just kind of the start of it. And it really fueled this insatiable curiosity about why is this happening? Why are so many women suffering? And, I was exposed to that more conventional side of medical care, which certainly has its place. But I was wondering, what else can we do to preventatively support and be proactive about our health, specifically, hormone health, because that's where so many of these things seem to be tying back to. So that kind of started me on a path to trying to educate myself and learn more. So I trained as a board certified nurse coach and studied functional and integrative medicine for a year with Dr. Viva Ram in her women's professional training course. And that was truly a goldmine and gave me that context for women's health and really fueled my desire to support women holistically, because so many of those hormone health challenges really do come down to the basics, the foundational factors, the things we do day in and day out consistently. So coaching seemed to be a really good fit for me. So that kind of leads me to today, and in my own health journey, I am still learning to slow down, to let go of perfectionism, which is something that was really exacerbated both in high school and academia, and then through nursing school, learning to become more embodied, drop into my body, listening to my body's messages, getting curious about my symptoms instead of hating them or overriding or ignoring them. And, trying to ask that question, what is my body and its wisdom trying to tell me? So through that, I'm really grateful to have found healing from those disordered eating habits and have a healthy relationship with food where I really embrace nourishment in a way that's non-restrictive and balanced and just embracing my body for the way that it is. So that's been hugely freeing. And I really credit that support with, good authors and books and courses and lots of just tuning into my body signals to get to where I am today. So obviously not perfect, but in a much better place than I was. So that's my story in a nutshell.
Oh, Brooke, thank you so much for taking us through that. I mean, it's so interesting how this question always takes us through sometimes a decade or more of someone's life in just a few minutes. And there's so many pieces of your story that we can pick up on. I mean, I think one thing that I just thought was really interesting. So, based on what you shared with us, you've never used the pill, correct? You've never
That's
actually been on
right.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, nope.
And in many ways, you had such a gentle introduction into your cycle. It sounds like your mom was amazing. And I haven't heard of the book that you mentioned. You said The Care and Keeping of You. I was taking notes, but I can relate because I remember my mom bought a book. I look back and I think, that's pretty. My mom's, we're West Indian background. Like, it's not like, right. Like, so I feel like, you did pretty good. Like, this was, it's a good, like, regardless, I haven't heard of the book, but regardless of that, having the opportunity to go through and read something and to feel supported and to have those conversations with your mom, regardless of how detailed,
Yes.
just to have them at all. And your period started at 13. I feel like based on the interviews that I've done throughout the years, it is a lot different getting your period about 13 because you're ready. Like by that, I can't make a broad generalization, but by 13, 14, you're ready. Like you've got some girlfriends that have had it. You're not the first one. You kind of are aware of this thing called periods. It doesn't completely catch you off guard. So I just want to put that out there as well, because it's very different compared to some of the women who I've interviewed who, let's say they get it at age 10 or something like that, and they're the first one and they didn't even know what it was and thought they were dying. So I feel like it was all like you got a bouquet of flower, like it's so lovely. But even so, right, you still had to deal with pain and the different challenges that came with it. So it's like even with the most gentle introduction to periods, it can still be a bittersweet type of experience because the periods themselves can be problematic.
Yes. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I think you summarized that really well. It's kind of the good and the bad. Like both of these things can be true. And there's a lot of nuance but I do think, having that support from my mom and that preparedness and that curiosity and a book to turn to and a celebration. I mean, even those little things were just huge to give me, an overall positive anticipation of what was going to happen in my body instead of a dread or just like a completely caught off guard out of the blue. I think I'm dying, because I've certainly heard those stories before, and that breaks my heart.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it certainly it sparks something in me to hear the way you framed it and what your experience was like. And it's interesting because I didn't write down exactly what you said, but you were kind of looking forward to this event. And then when it took place, you were kind of like, well, this is what it's going to be like. This is like, this is not okay. And it's interesting because I also had painful periods, but I didn't necessarily, I don't know. I didn't necessarily look at it in that particular way where I was dreading this like as a concept for like the rest of my life. And I don't know why that is. I don't know why I never really looked at my periods as a whole as negative, even though the individual experience of periods for myself was quite negative for a very long time. I feel like somehow, I don't know why, even at a young age, I did. And I think maybe it's because I didn't see any of my friends suffering. So I feel like I didn't think that this was how it was supposed to be. So
Yeah.
I'm just like trying to think through like what, like you felt that way. Why
Right.
didn't I?
Right. I think there was as I kind of reflect back on that now, I think there was a very huge element of permanence in my mind, because I'm, huge planner, and I was just sitting there and I didn't know that eventually my period would stop. I thought all the days of my life I'm going to have this period.
Oh, like you thought you were just
until
going
I
to keep
die.
bleeding.
Yes. Yeah. Well,
Interesting.
I knew it stopped, for a time, but every single month I knew
Right.
I thought I would have to get my period. And so there was a very real element of the permanence. It's not going to change. It's not going to get better. So that just was a damper on my early teenage years for sure.
Well, and it made me think that so often it's so interesting. Often when we think about educating teens about periods, it's more the emotional aspect and what it means to us and having a positive relationship with our bodies. This is kind of more of what I've heard. This is a lot of interviews.
Mm.
And I feel like this is the first time just hearing the way, and I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just the way you shared it, but this is the first time that I really thought to myself, well, we need tools too. We also need tools for how to make it so that it's not painful.
Right.
It's not even enough just to say it shouldn't be painful. We actually need practical tools for young women so that if they do experience that pain, they have something to turn to that offers real, science-backed potential for relief. And that's the piece that was missing. So if you had, I mean, the ibuprofen obviously helped, you were able to manage it. Thankfully, you were able to do that with kind of minimal intervention, which is great. And that's just what occurred to me. So I'm sharing that because I've never thought of it in that specific way before. The way it's always talked about with teens is more of the emotional piece of it, which that was addressed with you.
Right. Right. Yeah, there could have been absolutely more tools in my toolbox. And perhaps at the time, this wasn't as well known. And certainly my mom did the best with what she knew to support me. But yeah, we know more and there's more resources. So that's a huge component of, introduction to your period as well.
Well, and then you also share just your experience with navigating body changes. And it's interesting because I don't know how much that's talked about or in what way that's talked about. And I can remember that too. I'm sure that many of the listeners can remember specific things that changed about their bodies that made them uncomfortable. Like I remember looking down and seeing my legs were larger and having no context for that. Just kind
Yeah.
of these things just happen. And I don't think that those specific kinds of changes were discussed. I feel like it's more period focused, maybe. And then you described your experience with running and all of that. So, I mean, now that you've been like obviously in the program, you've been charting and you've been working with clients and charting. And so just maybe share a little bit, like go a little bit deeper into that, in however way you would like to, because many women face the same thing where whether it's intentional or unintentional, looking to control weight with exercise and diet and things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think learning about what was going on inside gave me so much context for my body and how I'm wired uniquely and built as a woman. And that really sparked deeper sense of self-compassion and self-gentleness and like, hey, my body's supposed to be different in different ways. And I think so. I came across your book a couple of years back, maybe 3 or 4, and I read it. I blew through it. It was incredible. And that just opened my mind to cycle tracking. I was like, oh my gosh, you can actually track different signs. And that really just started filling in more dots of what I knew about women's health and connecting it to a very deeply like visceral and somatic way. So it's not just nebulous in my head anymore. It's like, no, I'm actually tracking cervical mucus. I'm looking at my basal body temperature. I'm noticing what's going on, in terms of cramping or anything that I feel internally and keeping track of that. And that really, connected me. I think having a deeper relationship with my body in that way really helped to get me to where I am today, knowing that working with my body and following my body's cues paired with knowledge of, what we know of nutrition, what we know of what's good for hormone health, and seeing that reflected in my cycle as I started nourishing more. So I really became aware of the fact that, I'm probably not eating enough protein through my day. And, even though I don't always feel hungry, waking up, I always eat, a high protein breakfast. And that really sets me up for feeling stable blood sugars throughout the day and less jittery and high and low. So things like that were very practical, paired with what I knew, like the physiology of the cycle, and connecting it to what I was observing really just kind of came full circle for me and has allowed me to, just become more embodied and kind of overcome some of those body image challenges, which of course, that's never like completely not there for me. I certainly have days, but as a general whole, I think, being able to be in a very different place than I was 10 years ago, where I was constantly hitting that override button and constantly trying to manipulate a certain shape. And instead of trying to feel better, like, my goals are different. And that has shifted in how I care for myself and what I eat and that kind of thing.
hopping into today's episode with an incredible resource to share. Today's episode is brought to you by my top resource for women's health professionals, How to Interpret Virtually Any Chart Your Client Throws at You. Our new ebook breaks down complex chart interpretation into an easy step-by-step process. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/chart to snag your complimentary copy today. That's fertilityfriday.com/chart. Now let's go ahead and jump back into today's episode. Well, and question for someone who's listening, because it's not necessarily the easiest thing to do. And I think that there's an interesting relationship between women's health professionals and disordered eating patterns. And it could be, I've had a number of conversations, so it could be a situation where you are concerned. I think first of all, being female in this world puts us if someone says, I'm not at all concerned about my body, it's like, I think we're all concerned about our body. I think there's just a spectrum as to how much, right? So I'm also like, we're all kind of aware of all of that kind of stuff. And so I've heard from some practitioners that they even chose to go into, let's say, nutrition school or whatever it is, because they wanted to learn more so that they could better control the situation or whatever it is. So there's an interesting relationship there. So maybe just share with us a little bit about, you mentioned how cycle charting helped you to kind of overcome. Was there a moment? Was it a process? It's not an easy thing to overcome.
Right. I think it was a process. I don't think there was a certain moment. I was actually trying to remember, when did I come across cycle tracking? Did it kind of hit me over the head and just start? But no, it was like this very gradual thing where one spark of curiosity led to the next. I don't even know how I came across your book, but that was really that, entryway into really tracking my cycle. And, I think also studying like more of that functional integrative medicine and combined with like what I knew of physiology. So realizing my body under stress and how it responds to my stressful environment versus my body when I'm nourished and taking care of myself and getting enough sleep, like I feel better. And like that is such more of a priority, and taking joy in being a woman and like buying clothes that I feel beautiful in and that fit me well, finding joy in movement. Like I am a huge proponent of movement in all of its forms now, but my focus is different. It's more of like what helps me to feel well, what do I enjoy, what's fun, and that I'm not like beating myself up every time when I try to work out. So I think it was kind of that gradual shift and kind of my inner rebel where I'm like, hey, these diet culture messages are not serving me. They're not serving the women around me. This ideal of kind of like the cultural ideal of really tall and thin, which the majority of women do not naturally fit into, like that is not a helpful message to hear. And so how can I try to reframe that and walk the talk and live that for myself? And in doing so, I feel so much better. And I want to hopefully, inspire other women through coaching and in just, living to also feel like they don't have to conform to that cultural ideal, because it's not realistic for most women and it's not conducive to feeling well and our best and having the most energy. And that's really, I think if we're going to boil it down to what a lot of women are seeking or most is, I want to feel well so that I can show up vibrantly for life, or I can show up and, take care of my kids or be present for my family or work in a career that's fulfilling to me, whatever our goals in life might be. Health is a huge piece of that that's often taken for granted until we maybe have that taken away from us or we don't feel great. So for me, it's been gradual.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's just also interesting and really puts it into perspective. It feels there's a general shift toward health focused as opposed to body focused, which is not easy. But I also think that at some point you get to a certain age where you no longer have the patience to feel bad all the time.
Yeah.
So I do think some of that hopefully comes with age and maturity and experience and just the demands of life requiring that you can actually feel good enough to do the things that you need to do. But there was something else that you said that I thought was interesting. You mentioned that you have older brothers and you kind of watch their transformations, which were very different because obviously men don't have the same fat distributions and all of those kinds of body composition issues. And so I thought that that was a really interesting piece of it, combined with what you just said about kind of embracing what it means to become a woman and buying clothes that you felt good in. And I think that it's the expectations for the female body are so incredibly unrealistic that even the fancy people, the models and the movie stars, they talk about having their bodies airbrushed on magazines and things, and parts of their legs erased and whatnot, because even they don't meet the standard that is set. So even real human women are not meeting the standard for this ideal human woman on these covers of magazines. And I remember being a teenager and I had no idea. I can remember being kind of pre-university Lisa, thinking that they actually looked that way, thinking the models actually didn't have pores and they actually had these stick things for legs, and they didn't have any fat and whatever. And especially as a woman of color who is also quite kind of curvy in my shape, I didn't see a lot of that representation. I think it's a little bit different now because there's certainly been like a bum swell. I guess this is a terrible thing, but I just made that up. But you know what I mean? There's been a shift from the 80s, because I'm old enough to see that there's been a shift. And I think that even comes with other problems because not everybody has the exaggerated curvy shape as well. And so there's pressure on both sides to have this ideal that most of us don't look like. So I thought all of that was really interesting. And to shift a little bit, you mentioned that you are, an RN. So you have your toe in the kind of highly medicalized world as well as the functional world. So you're doing a bit of a balance, which I think is interesting. And you shared about your experience even as a student and working in some of the demands of that. And I've interviewed a number of doctors who talk about their experience in residency. And it sounds like it's like going off to war because there's just so many demands of your time, these long shifts, this, not getting a lot of sleep and not really having a lot of time to take care of yourself. And so, and because you're part of the program, I also know that you recently made some shifts in your work. Maybe share a little bit about that, about some of just balancing all of that, and what your personal experience was with the very real demands of the kind of medical career.
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I became a nurse in that hospital job, for the first couple of years of it, I worked night shift. So that was something that, just straight nights, that was new to me and disruptive, obviously, to my sleep schedule. But the nice thing with working in healthcare is that I've always worked part-time. And I had some pretty clear boundaries from the very beginning of not picking up, much to sometimes my coworkers' chagrin, not picking up extra shifts and trying to take that time for deep self-care. Because after school, I found that I had more time in my schedule that wasn't devoted to studying or preparing for tests, where I could work on my own health and that kind of thing. So I think that the hours were good, but eventually I ended up switching jobs. I did some travel nursing for a while, which was fun. But I kind of had a shift in realization, especially this year, after 8 years in OB, that it was time to shift to something a little bit less intense. And, I look back fondly on those years of nursing, and I think it was really, again, trying to tune in to what is my body trying to tell me, and is it time for a change? And sometimes, that takes more courage, because my whole skill set, my knowledge base was in, OB, so labor and delivery and postpartum. And now I'm working something that is a bit of a pivot from that, but far less stressful overall and intensive. And that has paired itself really well as I've been in the beginning of, or kind of partway in, starting a business and learning fertility awareness. And that has taken time and attention and become my main focus. And so it's been really awesome to have a job that is part-time and supportive to that, and kind of take that leap from one pretty stressful job into something a little bit more conducive to my needs right now. So, the beautiful thing with working as a nurse is that it does have flexibility, and you don't have to be stuck somewhere if there's a job that's not serving you or stressful. There's a lot of times other options out there. So yeah, I'm grateful to be where I'm at right now. But yeah, healthcare, working in healthcare is not easy. And there's definitely, I think for many healthcare workers, it's difficult to prioritize self-care, ironically, because we should be the healthy people because we're, working to make other people well. But a lot of times that leads to us not caring for ourselves. So I have a special place in my heart for fellow nurses, doctors, care providers of any type who work around the clock providing care, because that's not an easy place to be in.
Well, and I feel like in your experience, it was like there were seasons, right? So there were times when this made sense to work this way, but then you also gave yourself the ability to pivot when you felt that it was, necessary to do so. And I do find it interesting that I'm not saying that this has anything to do with your pivot, but it does happen occasionally. And I know I've spoken about it here and there where you start charting, you start to see certain things. And so I'm not giving you as an example, Brooke. I'm going to give a general example from several clients I've seen over the years, but I've seen several clients who work, and it's not just healthcare. We're not picking on healthcare providers today, but who work stressful jobs, or even if the job isn't as stressful, I've seen clients who had really stressful commutes, and so a lot of different things that contribute. And with a lot of clients, you get to the point where you see some challenges on the chart, whether it's signs of low hormones, limited mucus, post-ovulatory phase things, short luteal phase, spotting, whatever it is. But you see signs of low hormones. And I have seen a number of clients, again, I'm not speaking about you, Brooke, just in general, where you do all the things. You go down the list, you improve all the things, and then you start to see that there's a kind of systemic issue related to the work. So I have seen a lot of clients over the years who, after they see that kind of in black and white on their charts, they start to make different shifts and pivots. So again, I'm not saying that has anything to do with your situation in particular, if you want to jump in and share a little bit about that, but just as the person on the sidelines watching and observing, I always find it very interesting that these things sometimes coincide.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And you can certainly share, like, that's certainly a piece of my story too, especially really tuning into fertility awareness this year, learning more about the cycle and interpreting that cycle. Then I've been able to see some pretty interesting changes in my own cycle as my stress levels have overall gone down. And it just speaks to how much stress can impact us in a lot of different ways, even if we don't know, like I talked about, in nursing school, I wasn't necessarily super aware of how stressful it was in the moment, but hindsight is 2020, as they say. But I think creating that space, like I was actually out on a backpacking trip in the middle of the woods when I was kind of thinking through what is really serving me. Do I need to make any pivot or changes? And, the work piece came up really prominently. So it was that space that I had kind of created to check in with my body and kind of with, my goals, where I want to be. And yeah, it's been really interesting to see that reflected in the cycle.
Well, we can shift gears a little bit as we start wrapping up. I would love to hear a little bit about your experience in the FAMM program, and also for anyone who is in a similar position as you are, where they're kind of thinking about adding in this additional piece of it, learning more about the cycle, how it relates to overall health, the vital sign piece. Yeah, maybe share a little bit about what your experience was like.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned that I read your book like 3 years ago. My mind was blown. At that time, I felt like I just needed to tell everyone about it. So I was posting, and I had been keeping an eye on your FAMM course for practitioners for a couple of years. And when I decided to take that leap at the end of last year, it was a very deeply intuitive decision. I knew that I wanted to work with you and take those next steps to become a fertility awareness practitioner. I had listened to your podcast, read your book. I was familiar with your work and really trusted you and kind of the perspective that you take on cycle tracking. So for me, learning fertility awareness this year has really given context to all of the things that I've learned in terms of helping to support women's health holistically. So that sleep piece and the nutrition piece and all those things like fit so beautifully into cycle tracking, because we have that context. Then we can track our cycles, and then we can also work on these lifestyle factors. So my experience in the course was I think it really exceeded even what I had expected would happen. There was a really high touch point, which I was so grateful for. You doing weekly calls and having those one-on-one check-ins. And, I, of course, like with my background in nursing, I really appreciate things that are evidence-based and well-researched and kind of having sources to cite and things to kind of dig into. And so everything that you would walk us through, whether it was on video or homework assignments, like it wasn't just fluff. It wasn't just like kind of to make us do things. Like there's a very intentional, specific process that we went through to build our confidence and to kind of fill in some of those gaps. There's a lot of real life case scenarios where what if a client asks you about this, and take a look at these studies, look at this chart. Let's really get into the weeds. And I am all for the weeds. And you did not hold back. Week after week looking through charts. So I think doing a year of that, working with practicum clients, I still feel new to this field, of course. I have a lot left to learn, but I feel equipped. I feel like I have the tools that I need to start to move forward and working with clients. And I just feel so grateful looking back that I chose your program. I was really drawn to symptothermal charting because of the book I read and because it's so empowering to be able to use our body's own signs and combine those paired with that high efficacy rate of using it for birth control. So yeah, overall, it's just been a fabulous experience that I would heartily recommend to anyone who wants to just go deeper into cycle tracking and learn how to teach that for themselves.
Oh, thank you so much, Brooke. What a lovely testimonial. I know I was joking in which call, I think it was our most recent call, that we had such a lovely group this year. One of the great things about our group this year was that everyone got to know each other very well. And so I think that things are happening without me. You guys are like getting together and talking and doing all kinds of things. And I was joking, but not really, that at the last session, you were all trying to make me cry by sharing your experiences in the program, which I didn't anticipate, right? But I'm so glad to hear that you had such a positive experience. And ultimately, my goal as a practitioner is I think about this stuff a lot, right? Because I'm constantly nerding out about this stuff. But really, as a practitioner, I'm trying to think to myself, what were the things that helped me to feel confident? What were the things that actually helped me to get to the point where I felt that I can interpret all of these different charts? And it's experience. So it's experience as well as a lot of research. And so then how can I recreate 20 years of, right? So what we've done in the program is to really fast track your exposure to as much as possible within the duration of the class. And so it's really rewarding for me to hear that it's working.
Yeah.
That the goals are being met, because ultimately that's what it is. So I'm really glad to hear that, Brooke. And I suppose for any practitioner who is kind of in the same shoes that you were, who's kind of, wondering what it's going to be like, I feel like you've already answered, but if you have any words of encouragement, yeah, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, for sure. I would just say, if you have been curious about this, I think our curiosity, honestly, is there for a reason. I think people get drawn into this work. Maybe it calls you. I don't know. I know that was my experience for sure, is that I just had this really huge desire to help women once I had that positive experience of tracking my own cycles. So if it's something that you're curious about and that you want to learn more about, and you want to find a program that is something I love about your program too, is that it is about a year long. So it's pretty condensed. It's intense, and there's a lot of information and coursework, but it's a way to really elevate your practice and add this piece of fertility awareness in without having to go through multiple years of instructor training. So yeah, I would say take the leap, follow your curiosity, read the book. I think that's a really great reflection of your work, Lisa. And then we just go into so much more in the course itself. So I think it's extremely valuable. It will not be wasted for any person wanting to help support women in cycle tracking.
Well, thanks so much, Brooke. And you mentioned, of course, that you're in the process of your own transition to more of either a hybrid program or working towards making this your full-time thing. And so share with us any information that you have, website, socials, all the places where the listeners can learn more about you.
Yeah, thank you. So you can find me at coachingfrombrooke.com. That's my website. And then I also have an Instagram handle at the same Coaching from Brooke, and I'm on Facebook. And right now I am seeing myself just working with clients one-on-one to help them around charting their cycles using the symptothermal method, and then interpreting those charts so that we can work towards health. So whether it's just to learn how your body works for body literacy, improve hormone health, for natural birth control, I'm super excited to work with women from wherever they may be coming. So you can head to my website and check out my work. I have an option to sign up for a free discovery call with me, and I would love to connect with people there.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, we will make sure to link all the places on the show notes page, of course. And Brooke, thank you once again for being here. It's just been such a pleasure talking to you. I love doing these episodes. I feel like I always hear more pieces of the story that we didn't necessarily get to in our client session. So it's always fun for me to do these, and it's super fun for us to connect again.
Yes, absolutely, Lisa. Thanks so much for having me. It was such a joy to talk with you today.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/500. I hope that you enjoyed my conversation with Brooke. Lots of great takeaways there. I think it's worth an honorary mention that we've reached episode number 500. It's always around this time of year that I reflect on the podcast and what's been happening over the years, because it was around this time that I actually started the podcast 9 years ago. So this is actually the 9th year of the Fertility Friday podcast, meaning that next year will be our 10th year anniversary, which is wild, absolutely wild, that we have been sharing these episodes with you for so many years. So I want to say a special thank you to the Fertility Friday community. Of course, we wouldn't be able to do this without you, without your support. And I look forward to many more years of the Fertility Friday podcast. And that's a wrap. If you're loving the Fertility Friday podcast, then I know you'll love FAMM, our Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship Certification Program. It's a 9-month program designed to teach you how to use the menstrual cycle as a diagnostic tool in your women's health practice. The menstrual cycle is the missing piece you've been looking for to better support your clients to balance hormones, normalize their cycles, and optimize their fertility. When you join FAMM, I pull back the curtain and share advanced chart interpretation strategies and specialized client protocols that will completely transform your practice. Enrollment for FAMM is opening up again in a few months. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAMMlive to join the waiting list and be the first to know when early bird registration opens. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAMMlive.